You have spent decades being told to fear a tax that was never coming for your family, the estate tax. It comes up at Thanksgiving like a wolf at the door. Fewer than one estate in 100 in this country will ever owe a dollar of it. It was almost certainly never going to touch you. And while everybody's attention was fixed on that door, a completely different one was left standing wide open. And it is the one that is actually going to walk off with your children's money. In March of 2023, the tax authority issued a ruling that quietly rewrote what happens inside the exact kind of trust a great many families built for the most protective reason there is, to keep a house safe from nursing home costs. And I want to say the next part slowly because it is the reason this video exists. The ruling says that when a person puts property into an irrevocable trust, and that property is not counted as part of their estate when they die, their children do not get the tax reset that inherited property is supposed to receive. No reset means your children take on whatever you originally paid for the house from decades ago, and they pay tax on every single dollar it has grown since. Now, before anybody panics, I am going to be straight with you the way I always am, because there are two versions of this going around and both are wrong. The first version says, irrevocable trusts are a trap, and anybody who has one has been sold something harmful. That is not true, and I am going to show you exactly why. The second version says this is a technicality that only matters to wealthy families with complicated arrangements. That is also not true, and it is the more expensive of the two, because the people it actually reaches are ordinary families whose only real asset is a house that quietly grew for 30 years while they lived in it. Here is the accurate version, and it is three things. 1. Why property transferred at death is treated so much better than property given away, which is the single most counterintuitive rule in this entire area and the foundation for everything else. 2. Exactly what makes one irrevocable trust preserve that treatment and another destroy it. It is not the name of the trust. It is not the attorney's reputation. It comes down to a specific kind of authority you either kept or gave up, and I will tell you what it is called so you can go and look for it. 3. The 4 questions to put to whoever drafted it in writing and what a bad answer sounds like so you know one when you hear it. And here is the part I want you holding on to for the next 20 minutes, because it is the whole reason to keep watching rather than to worry. You are very likely not choosing between protecting the house and protecting your children from the tax. A properly built version of this does both at the same time. Most people have never been told that is possible, so they assume they made a trade they never actually had to make. My name is Kevin. I read the rules so you do not have to. Every week I go looking for the thing that quietly decides what happens to your money, and I bring it here before it costs you anything. If that sounds useful, subscribe and turn on the bell, because there is a 5-year clock attached to the fix at the end of this video, and it only runs forward. Let me start with the foundation, because if you do not have this piece, none of the rest will make sense. Everything here turns on one idea: basis. Your basis in your house is essentially what you paid for it, plus what you spent improving it. When somebody sells a house, they do not pay tax on the sale price. They pay tax on the difference between the sale price and the basis. That difference is the gain. So a house bought for $210,000 and sold for $700,000 has a gain of $490,000. At the long-term rate of 15%, that is $73,500 in federal tax. If the seller's income is high enough to trigger the additional investment income charge of 3.8%, add another $18,620. That is the $92,000 in the title of this video. And if their income puts them in the 20% bracket instead, it climbs well past $110,000. Now here is the rule that decides everything, and I want you to sit with how strange it is. If you give your house away while you are alive, the person receiving it takes your basis. Whatever you paid in 1990, that becomes their number. Every dollar the house grew while you owned it stays taxable, and it becomes their problem. But if that same house passes at your death, and it counted as part of your estate, the basis resets to what the house was worth on the day you died. Section 1014 of the tax code. 30 years of growth simply vanishes from the calculation. Not deferred, not reduced, gone. So, the house bought for $210,000 and worth $700,000, inherited rather than given, has a basis of $700,000. Sold the following month for $700,000. The gain is nothing, and the tax is nothing. Same house, same children, same sale price. One route costs $92,000 and the other costs nothing. And I want to name the strangeness out loud because it is what makes people get this wrong. In almost every other part of life, doing something early and generously is the better version. Here it is the opposite. The tax code rewards property that transfers at death and penalizes property that was handed over during life. That runs against every instinct a parent has, which is precisely why so many well-meaning people walk directly into it. Now, the trust. And here is the trap in one sentence. The tax reset at death does not follow ownership. It follows whether the property counted as part of your estate when you died. Those two are not the same thing, and that gap is where families lose $90,000. Before the ruling in 2023, there was a widespread assumption that assets in these trusts got the reset anyway, because the person who set it up was still treated as the owner for income tax purposes. Attorneys said it, beneficiaries claimed it. The authority looked at that and said, no. If the property was given away completely and was not counted in the estate at death, then there is no reset. Now hear what that ruling did not say, because this is the part that matters most. It did not say irrevocable trusts lose the reset. It said trusts where the property is outside the estate lose it, which means a trust deliberately built so the property stays inside the estate keeps it. And this is the piece almost nobody explains. Keeping the house inside your estate for tax purposes does not undo the protection from care costs. Those are two separate legal tests. You can be outside the reach of one and inside the other at the same time. That is not a loophole. It is how these are supposed to be drafted. Let me tell you about Hollis. Hollis is 79 and lives in the house he bought in 1986, with a workshop out the back that he built himself. 6 years ago, his wife spent 14 months in a care facility before she died, and the cost of it took most of what they had saved. Afterward, he did what a person does after watching that happen. He went to a lawyer and he said, "I do not want this house going the same way. Protect it for my son." He signed everything. It cost him a few $1,000s, and he considered it the best money he ever spent, and he told his son so. The house cost him $104,000 in 1986. It is worth about $630,000 now. Nobody in that office ever used the words cost basis in front of him. Not once. He was asked about care costs, and he answered about care costs, and the question that would have cost 20 extra minutes to ask never came up. Hollis is not going to find out. His son will, in a year neither of them has picked yet, from an accountant. That is the whole reason the quiet rules exists. Plain English, printed large enough to read without hunting for your glasses, on the things that quietly decide what happens to your money. What the paragraph is called, where to look for it, and the exact questions to put to whoever holds your file, so that a document you already paid for is a document you actually understand. It is at kevinexplains.shop. The link is in the description below and in the pinned comment at the top. And if you are watching this on a television right now, there is a code on the screen you can point your phone camera at. 7-day guarantee, always. If it does not hand you something you did not have before, you send it back. So here is a question worth sitting with. When was the last time anybody read your trust to you? Now, before I tell you what to look for, let me explain why people set these up in the first place, because I am not here to suggest anybody was foolish for doing it. Nursing home care in this country runs to many thousands of dollars a month. Most families cannot carry that for long out of savings, and the program that covers it for people who cannot is Medicaid, which is needs-based. It looks at what you own, and critically, it looks backward 5 years at anything you gave away. That 5-year look back is the whole reason these get done early. Anything transferred inside that window creates a penalty period, and the penalty is calculated by dividing what you gave away by the average monthly cost of care in your state. On a house worth $400,000, that can leave a person ineligible for 2 or 3 years, during which they are paying for care out of their own pocket at exactly the moment they have nothing left. So a transfer done in a panic, after a diagnosis, frequently makes the situation worse rather than better. Done 6 years earlier, calmly, it works. So the strategy is legitimate. You move the house into an irrevocable trust. Once the 5 years pass, that house is generally no longer counted as yours for that purpose. You have protected the roof over your head from being consumed by care costs, and protected what is left of it for your children. And the reason people choose an irrevocable trust, rather than an ordinary living trust, is exactly the thing that creates the tax problem. Irrevocable means you gave something up. You cannot simply take the house back out whenever you like. That surrender is what makes it protected in the first place, which is why the fix is so specific. You cannot solve this by keeping more control, because control is what you traded away to get the protection. You have to keep exactly the right kind of authority, and no more. Now let me give you what to actually look for, because this is the useful part and I want you to be able to do it. There is a specific kind of authority that, if you kept it, pulls the property back into your estate for tax purposes and preserves the reset. In these documents, it is usually called a limited power of appointment, sometimes a special power of appointment. Here is what it means in plain terms. It is a right you kept to change, at your death, which of your family members ends up with the property and in what shares. That is all it is. You cannot take the house back. You cannot sell it and spend the money. You cannot give it to yourself or your creditors. All you kept is the ability to redirect it among a defined group. And because you kept no ability to get at the property for your own benefit, it does not break the care cost protection. But because you kept the power to determine where it lands, the tax rules count it as part of your estate, which triggers the reset. That is the entire mechanism. One paragraph doing two jobs. There are other features that can accomplish the same thing. A retained right to live in the house for the rest of your life. A retained right to the income the property produces. Certain powers over how and when beneficiaries receive things. A well-drafted version of this often has more than one. So here are the 4 questions. Put them in writing, in an email, so the answer comes back in writing too. 1. Will the property in my trust be included in my gross estate for federal estate tax purposes at my death? 2. Will my beneficiaries receive a step-up in basis under Section 1014 when I die? 3. Did I retain a limited power of appointment, and if so, where is it in the document? 4. If the answer to the first 2 is no, what can be done now to change that? Write those down. Send them exactly as I have said them. And here is how to read the answer you get back, because the answer tells you more than the content of it does. A good answer is short and it is specific. It names the paragraph. It points to a section number in the tax code. It says yes or it says no. Somebody who built this deliberately will answer in 2 sentences without reaching for anything, because it was a decision they made on purpose while drafting. A bad answer is long and it is general. It reassures you about how well protected everything is without answering what you asked. It talks about the excellent job the trust does on care costs, which is not the question. Or it says something like, the trust is a grantor trust, so the treatment should be fine, which is precisely the assumption the ruling in 2023 overturned. If you get the second kind of answer, that is not proof that anything is wrong. It is a reason to have somebody else read the document. And I want to be fair to the profession here, because I am not accusing anybody of anything. A great many of these were drafted before that ruling existed, by people doing competent work under the understanding that everyone shared at the time. The ruling changed what a careful draft looks like. It did not make anybody dishonest. And now the part that should genuinely lift some weight off you. It can very often be fixed. These are called irrevocable, and that word makes people assume the door is welded shut. It is frequently not. Many of these documents include a person, sometimes called a trust protector, with authority to make exactly this kind of amendment. Many states allow a process called decanting, where the contents of one trust are poured into a newly drafted one with better terms. Some states permit modification by agreement among everyone involved, or by asking a court. And there are documents that already contain a power to substitute assets, which opens a different route entirely. Not every one of these is available in every state or in every document, but the assumption that nothing can be done is wrong far more often than it is right, and it is the assumption that keeps people from asking. 2 practical notes about that. The first is cost. Reviewing a trust and answering the 4 questions is a modest piece of work for somebody who does this daily, and a great many attorneys will confirm whether the paragraph is in there without charging you much of anything, because it takes them minutes. Amending or decanting one costs more, and it is still a fraction of the tax at stake. Set the 2 numbers next to each other before you decide it is too expensive to look into. The second is timing, and it is the harder one. If the fix involves moving property or restructuring in a way that counts as a new transfer, that can restart the 5-year clock for care purposes. That is not always the case, and a properly done amendment frequently does not, but it is precisely the question to ask before anybody signs anything. Ask it in these words: will this change restart my look-back period? If the person cannot answer that immediately, stop and find somebody who can, because getting the tax right and losing the protection is not a trade worth making. And this is why age matters here in a way it does not elsewhere. At 72, with reasonable health, there is room to fix something and still clear a 5-year window. At 86, it is a different calculation entirely, and the right answer may be to leave the protection alone and plan around the tax instead. There is no single answer, and anybody who gives you one without asking how old you are and how you are keeping is not actually advising you. There is also one route that avoids the whole question for some families, and it is worth naming because almost nobody mentions it. If your children are going to live in the house rather than sell it, the arithmetic changes completely. A person who owns a home and lives in it as their main residence for at least 2 of the 5 years before selling can exclude up to $250,000 of gain, or $500,000 for a married couple filing together. That exclusion belongs to them regardless of what basis they inherited. So a son who moves into his mother's house and lives there for 2 years before selling can wipe out a great deal of gain, even without any reset at all. The conditions are strict. He has to actually live there. Renting it out does not qualify, and leaving it empty does not qualify, and the 2-year clock does not begin until he moves in. But for the family where somebody is going to take the house on rather than sell it, this can matter more than everything else in this video. Let me put the number behind the fear I opened this video with, because I promised you it and I want it in your hands precisely rather than roughly. The federal estate tax exemption this year is $15 million for one person and $30 million for a married couple. Your estate has to exceed that before the federal government takes a single dollar. Keeping your house inside your estate for tax purposes, which is what buys your children the reset, costs almost every family watching this exactly nothing against that threshold. So hold the two numbers side by side. The tax you were taught to fear starts at $15 million. The tax that is actually going to reach your children starts the moment a house you paid $200,000 for is worth $700,000, and the wrong box was checked in a document you never read. I will add one honest note. A number of states run their own estate or inheritance taxes with far lower thresholds than the federal one, and a handful have no exemption worth speaking of. So it is a fair question to ask about your own state. But even in those states, the reset on an inherited home usually saves considerably more than the state tax costs. Let me tell you about Vesta. Vesta is 82. Her trust was drawn up 11 years ago by an attorney her church recommended, and she has never opened it since the day she signed it. It lives in a fireproof box with her marriage certificate. Her granddaughter, who works in accounting, asked her one Sunday whether the trust kept the step up. Vesta did not know what that meant, which is not a failing because nobody had ever said it to her. So they sent the 4 questions. The answer came back in one paragraph, and it named the section. And the section was there. Her attorney had built it correctly, 11 years ago, without ever explaining to her that she had made a choice. And here's what struck me about it. Vesta spent one evening genuinely afraid, and the fear was for nothing, and she only carried it because in 11 years, nobody had ever told her what her own document did. That is exactly the gap this guide closes. Not to make anybody an expert in trust law, to put the questions and the plain meaning in one place, so that finding out where you stand takes an evening rather than a decade, and so that whatever the answer turns out to be, you are the one who knows it. Same place, kevinexplains.shop, link in the description and in the pinned comment at the top, and the code on your screen if you are watching this on the television. 7-day guarantee, no argument. An 82-year-old woman sitting up at night with a fireproof box, afraid of a document she paid for and was never shown. Now, before the other ways this goes wrong, there is one more arrangement worth knowing about, because for a certain kind of family, it is the simplest answer in this entire video. It is called a life estate deed. You transfer the house to your children now, but you keep, written into the deed itself, the legal right to live there for the rest of your life. Nobody can put you out. You are not a guest in your own home. Here is why it matters for everything I have been describing. Because you kept that lifetime right, the tax rules count the property as part of your estate at your death, so your children get the reset. And because the transfer already happened, the house passes to them automatically, without going through the court process, which is what most people were trying to achieve in the first place. It is simpler than a trust, and it costs considerably less to set up. Now, the honest side of it, because this one has a real edge to it, Once that deed is signed, you cannot sell the house without your children's agreement. Every one of them has to sign. If you decide at 83 that the stairs have become too much and you want to move somewhere smaller, you need everybody on board, and families are families. It is also a transfer for care purposes, so the 5-year clock applies to it exactly as it does to a trust. So it is a real option. It is not the right one for everybody, and it is worth knowing exists rather than hearing about it after the fact. Now, 3 other ways this same thing goes wrong, and they are quicker. The first is a trust that was never actually filled. This happens more than anybody would guess. The document gets drawn up, it gets signed, everybody feels the matter is settled, and the deed to the house is never changed into the trust's name. So the trust exists, and it is empty. It controls nothing. When the person dies, the house goes through exactly the process the trust was meant to avoid, and the family discovers this while grieving. The check takes 10 minutes. Look at your deed, or look up your property record with the county, and see whose name the house is in. If it is still in yours personally, and you believe it is in a trust, that is a conversation to have this week. The second is putting a child on the deed. I will keep this short because it is the version most people already half know. Adding your son or daughter as a joint owner while you are alive gives away part of the house, which means part of it carries your old basis forever, and that portion never resets no matter how long you live afterward. It also exposes that share to their divorce, their creditors, and their lawsuits, and it usually requires a gift tax filing that almost nobody makes. It feels like the simple option. It is the expensive one. The third is genuinely good news for people in 9 states. In community property states, which are Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin, when one spouse dies, the entire property gets the reset, not just the deceased spouse's half. The surviving spouse gets a full new basis on the whole house. Everywhere else, only the deceased spouse's half resets. The survivor keeps their original basis on their own half, permanently, and that difference can easily be worth tens of thousands of dollars when the survivor eventually sells. Which leads to something worth knowing if you are a widow or widower watching this. If you inherited a half interest in your home when your spouse died, part of your basis was reset on that day. What the house was worth at that moment matters, and if you never had it valued, that is worth raising with whoever prepares your taxes, because reconstructing a value from years ago is possible, and it gets harder every year. Let me tell you about Emmitt. Emmitt is 74, and his wife died 5 years ago. They lived in Ohio, which is not one of the 9. He is thinking about selling the house now and moving nearer his daughter. He has assumed all along that because he inherited his wife's share, the whole house was reset when she died. Half of it was. His own half is still carrying what they paid in 1981. Nobody told him wrong. He simply extended a rule he had heard correctly into territory it does not cover, which is what every single person in this video did, including the lawyers. Now let me give you my honest opinion, which is only that, and you are welcome to disagree with me in the comments. I do not think anybody engineered this. There is no villain in it. An attorney sitting across from a frightened person after a spouse has died in a care facility is being asked one question, and it is not a tax question. It is, please make sure this does not happen to me. And they answer that question, competently, and the person leaves relieved. The conversation about what happens to the basis afterward is a different conversation. It is dry. It concerns a moment neither person wants to discuss, and it happens after the client has already exhaled. My objection is narrower than blame. It is that a document like this makes a decision on your behalf that you were never told was being made. You were not offered a choice between protection and the tax reset. You were not told the choice existed, or that in most cases it is not even a choice, because a well-built version delivers both. You simply signed, and a paragraph either was or was not included, and you will not find out which for years, and you will not be the one who finds out. And that is the thread running through everything on this channel. Not that anybody is hiding things from you, that the moment when a decision gets made and the moment when its consequence arrives are separated by 20 years, and nothing in the system connects them. All right, here is your list. 5 things, and none of them takes longer than an evening. 1. Find the document. Physically find it. If you cannot, ask whoever drafted it for a copy today, because everything else on this list depends on having it in your hands. 2. Check that the house is actually in it. Look at the deed or the county record and see whose name is on the property. A trust with nothing in it protects nothing. 3. Send the 4 questions in writing. Will the property be in my gross estate? Will my beneficiaries get the step up under Section 1014? Did I retain a limited power of appointment, and where is it? And if not, what can be done now? 4. If the answer is unclear or evasive, have a second person read the document. That is not disloyalty to anybody. It is the same thing you would do with a diagnosis. 5. Know your numbers. What you paid for the house, roughly what it is worth now, and the difference. Multiply that difference by 15%, and that is roughly the tax your children either pay or do not pay, decided by one paragraph. And there is a 6th thing that is not on the list because it is not urgent, but it will matter enormously to somebody one day, so do it while you are thinking about it. Write down what you paid for the house and when, and put it with the deed. Then add whatever you can remember spending on it that was an improvement rather than a repair. A new roof, the addition, the kitchen you did in '98, central air. Improvements add to your basis, which means they reduce the taxable gain, and almost nobody keeps the receipts for 30 years. If the reset applies, none of that matters. But if it turns out it does not apply, every one of those numbers is worth real money to your children, and you are the only person alive who knows them. An index card in an envelope with the deed is enough. Nobody needs perfection. They need a starting point that is not a blank page. And if your own situation is tangled, if you are holding a document and cannot tell what it says about any of this, write to me. The address is on your screen and in the description below, and I read every one that comes in. One last thing before you go. Hollis paid a lawyer to protect the house he built a workshop behind, and he will die believing he succeeded. And he may well have. And neither he nor I can tell you which without reading the paragraph. Vesta was afraid for one evening about a document that turned out to have been drafted properly 11 years earlier. And the only thing wrong was that nobody had ever told her so. And Emmitt is about to sell a house carrying a basis from 1981 on half of it, believing the whole thing was reset. All 3 of them did the responsible thing. All 3 of them paid somebody. Every one of them ended up holding a document that made a decision on their behalf without ever presenting it as a decision. And I want to say one thing to the people watching this who are now worried they have got it wrong, because I know there are some of you. You may not have got it wrong. A large share of these were drafted properly. The whole point of the 4 questions is that you do not have to guess, and the answer is very often the one you were hoping for, the way it was for Vesta. Worry is not information. A 1-paragraph reply from the person who holds your file is information, and it costs you an email. And if the answer does come back badly, you have found out at the only point in your life when finding out is useful. Nobody has died. Nothing has been sold. There is a document, and documents can be amended far more often than the word irrevocable suggests. The version of this that ends in a $90,000 tax bill is not the version where somebody found a problem. It is the version where nobody ever looked. So go and read yours this week while there is time to change it. Find the paragraph, send the 4 questions, and get the answer in writing, because in 20 years, you will not be the one who needs it. I am Kevin. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to check the quiet rules at kevinexplains.shop.